The dinner table, once the heart of our family, became a battleground the night my daughter-in-law, Lennox, exiled me to my room. "Your voice is annoying. Go eat in your room," she said, her words a cold, sharp knife that left me with a plate full of uneaten food and a heart full of silent tears. As I walked away, my son said nothing, but a flicker of something passed through his eyes, a hint of guilt, a fleeting moment of sadness, or perhaps a desperate plea for me to forgive his cowardice. Little did they know that the very next morning, I would call my lawyer to cancel the loan for her business, because Harold, my late husband, hadn't just left me with a broken heart, but with the power to change everything. You here follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has. That night at dinner, my daughter-in-law looked at me across the table and said very casually, "Your voice is annoying. Go eat in your room." For a second, I didn't quite process it. The words seemed to hang in the air, hovering between disbelief and humiliation. But then I felt my face flush, my hands tighten on the edge of my plate. I obeyed without another word, carrying my dinner upstairs like a scolded child. I ate alone, the meat growing cold as silent tears slipped down my cheeks. The next morning, I canceled the loan for her business. My name is Ramona. I'm 67 years old, and I thought I'd endured my fair share of life's small indignities. But last Tuesday evening, sitting at the very table my late husband Harold and I had purchased 43 years ago, the table that had seen thousands of meals, school projects, holiday feasts, and candle-lit anniversaries, my dignity cracked in a way I'm not sure can be repaired. That table was part of the foundation of our family's life. I'd fed Darren there when he was a boy, bandaged his knees after bicycle crashes, celebrated every birthday he ever had under its warm light. But now, in my own home, at my own table, I was nothing more than an inconvenience. My son Darren, now 34, sat there that night too. He didn't speak up, didn't defend me. He simply kept cutting his steak, eyes fixed on his plate, pretending not to hear. I'd seen that look before, his way of disappearing whenever Lennox decided I needed to be put in my place. The silence in the room was so thick it almost had weight. I finally pushed my chair back, forcing a tight smile and whispering, "Of course," though my voice trembled from hurt more than age. I picked up my plate, the porcelain suddenly heavy in my hands. "I'll just finish eating upstairs." Lennox gave me one of her small, cold smiles, the kind that said she'd won another round. "Thanks, Ramona. We just need some quiet time to talk business." Business. The word stung because I knew exactly which business she meant. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step harder than the last, my plate feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. From downstairs, I could still hear their voices, low and deliberate, probably planning another vacation or talking about how to salvage Lennox's cosmetics company. She'd been struggling to attract investors for over a year, or so she claimed. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to eat, but the meatloaf I had spent 2 hours making tasted like cardboard. My fork scraped the plate without purpose. The tears started as a trickle, then came harder, shoulders shaking until I could barely breathe. This wasn't the first time Lennox had spoken to me like that, but tonight felt different, final. For the past 3 years, ever since they married, I'd been tiptoeing around my own house. Lennox moved in 6 months after the wedding, saying they needed to save money for their future. But it didn't take me long to see the truth. What she wanted was control, and she'd gotten it, one careful, poisonous whisper to Darren at a time. "Your mother hovers too much. She treats you like you're still 12. Ramona always has to be the center of attention, doesn't she?" She'd say these things with a sugar-sweet smile, making them sound like harmless observations, just being honest. Darren believed her. At first, I tried to defend myself, explaining, clarifying, trying to show I wasn't the meddling mother-in-law she painted me as. But every attempt made things worse. Darren would get frustrated and ask why I couldn't just get along with her, why I had to make everything so difficult. So I stopped fighting. Instead, I started apologizing for cooking Darren's favorite meal without asking her first, for telling old family stories, for existing in my own home in ways she didn't approve of. If Harold were alive, he'd never have let anyone treat me like this. My husband had been the kind of man who never backed down, but Harold never had to choose between keeping his dignity and keeping his only child close. After he died 8 years ago, Darren became my whole world. I lived for his happiness, When he brought Lennox home, I was relieved, grateful. He'd found someone to love. I would have welcomed anyone who made him smile. What I didn't expect was to become her rival. The real pain wasn't the daily slights. It was the slow erosion of my bond with Darren. The son who once called me 3 times a week now barely managed a 5-minute conversation. The boy who used to ask my advice on everything now brushed off my opinions as if they were worthless. That night, eating alone in my bedroom while they enjoyed their business talk downstairs, I made a decision. I was tired of being invisible in my own home, in my own life, and what neither of them knew was that I still had power, more than Lennox could ever imagine. The next morning, I called my lawyer, not out of vengeance, at least not at first, but because Harold had always told me to review our finances every year. It was something I'd neglected since his death. Numbers had been his territory, grief had been mine. Mrs. Morrison, Robert Chen said warmly as I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. I'm glad you came in. There are matters regarding the Montgomery Trust that need your attention. The Montgomery Trust. Harold had set it up years ago, naming it after his grandfather, who'd founded the family construction business. I'd signed the papers but never truly looked into the details. Harold had handled the investments. I'd handled the rest of our lives. What exactly needs my attention? I asked, taking the thick folder Robert slid across the desk. Well, you're now the sole trustee, he explained. All investment decisions go through you. And the trust is doing very well, currently valued at approximately $2.8 million. I nearly dropped the folder. I'm sorry, how much? $2.8 million, Robert repeated, smiling patiently. Your husband was a shrewd investor. The trust has been generating strong returns, and per his instructions, those returns have been funding certain family investments. My pulse quickened. What kind of family investments? Robert flipped to another document. Monthly transfers to Luminous Beauty, LLC. That's your daughter-in-law's company, correct? The trust has provided approximately $180,000 in startup capital over the past 18 months, plus ongoing operational support of $15,000 per month. The room seemed to tilt beneath me. Luminous Beauty, Lennox's pride and joy, the company she boasted about building from nothing, the one she claimed was struggling to find investors, had been built with my husband's money. Money that was now mine to control. Does my son know about this? I asked, my voice tight. According to Harold's notes, the funding was meant to remain anonymous, Robert replied. He wanted the business to stand on its own merits, without the family feeling obligated. Obligated. That was Harold, always protecting Darren's pride, even from the grave. What he hadn't anticipated was how they'd treat the woman he left behind. What other investments are there? I asked, my voice only barely holding steady. Robert glanced back down at his files, flipping through pages like he was looking for the right card in a deck. Let's see, there's the mortgage assistance program that's been covering the property taxes and upkeep on both this house and the vacation cottage in Lake Tahoe, about $4,000 a month, and then there's the education fund. That's the one that paid for your son's MBA program, and right now it's covering his wife's business certification courses. Each sentence landed on me like a punch I couldn't dodge. Every comfort they'd enjoyed, every opportunity they'd taken, every success they'd celebrated. It was all built on Harold's legacy. Money that, by law, I was supposed to be the one controlling. I let the silence stretch for a moment before I asked slowly, Robert, what would happen if I decided to redirect these investments? He lifted an eyebrow, studying me. That's entirely your prerogative as trustee. You're free to allocate the funds however you choose, as long as it aligns with the trust's charitable and family support objectives. And if you were to withdraw support from certain underperforming investments, again, that's your decision. I'd simply recommend giving 30 days notice for major changes, just for practical reasons. I sat there for another full hour while Robert walked me through account numbers, investment strategies, and legal responsibilities I hadn't even known existed. Harold had built an entire empire without a word of it to me, and now it was mine. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the sharp, manipulative kind Lennox liked to wield, but the steady, unshakable strength that comes from finally understanding your own worth. Darren's car was already in the driveway when I pulled in. Through the kitchen window, I could see him and Lennox at the table, laptops open, papers scattered everywhere. Probably another business plan. Another vision for taking Luminous Beauty to the next level. If only they realized that every brick in their so-called empire rested on the generosity of the same woman they'd banished to eat dinner alone in her bedroom. I walked straight past them, past their intense meeting, and climbed the stairs to my room. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't tiptoeing through my own home. I was thinking, planning. That night, lying in bed, I could hear them downstairs celebrating some minor business victory. Harold had done his best to help them without wounding their pride. But Harold had never been humiliated at his own dinner table. It was time they understood exactly who they'd been taking for granted. I waited precisely 1 week before I made my first move. 7 days of watching Lennox strut through the house as though she owned it. Her smug little comments about my cooking, my clothes, my outdated way of doing things. 7 days of Darren nodding along like a bobblehead, agreeing to whatever she said just to keep the peace. On Thursday morning, I picked up the phone and called Robert Chen. "I want to discontinue funding for Luminous Beauty LLC, I told him, my voice steadier than I expected. "Effective immediately." "Are you certain, Mrs. Morrison? This will likely cause significant financial strain for the business." "I'm certain, and please suspend the monthly property assistance payments as well. I'll take care of those expenses myself from now on." The truth was, between my Social Security and Harold's pension, I could cover the property taxes and maintenance without blinking. The trust had simply been extra padding, a cushion that had made life comfortable for people who couldn't even show me basic courtesy. Robert processed the changes right there on the phone. By noon, the automatic transfers were gone. Luminous Beauty's safety net had just vanished, and they didn't have the faintest clue. I spent the rest of the day doing what I always did, cleaning, cooking, moving through the house like the harmless old woman they thought I was. But inside, I felt more alive than I had since the day Harold died. Friday morning brought the first crack in their perfect little world. I overheard Lennox on the phone in the kitchen, her voice tight with barely contained panic. "What do you mean the investor pulled out?" "We had an agreement." She was pacing near the window, one perfectly manicured hand slicing the air with every word. "Swan." "No, I don't understand. Everything was approved last month." I kept folding laundry at the kitchen table, as invisible as ever. She barely glanced at me as she snapped into the phone, "Find out what happened," before hanging up. Then her eyes flickered to me. "Ramona, did you hear any of that?" I looked up with a practiced innocence. "I'm sorry, dear. I was focused on getting these stains out of Darren's shirts. Is everything all right?" She studied my face for a beat, then shook her head. "Just business problems. Nothing for you to worry about." Nothing for me to worry about. If only she knew. By Monday, the panic had settled into something sharper. Lennox was on the phone constantly, calling banks, calling investors, trying to figure out why her funding had suddenly evaporated. She'd slam the receiver down, muttering about incompetent advisors and unreliable partners as she stormed through the house. That evening, Darren came home looking like the day had wrung him dry. Over dinner, served at the dining room table, though they didn't bother inviting me to join them, I could hear their tense, clipped conversation. "The bank says someone requested a review of our business accounts," Lennox said, stabbing at her salad. "They won't tell me who, but everything's frozen pending some investigation." "Investigation of what?" Darren asked. "We haven't done anything wrong." "I know," she said sharply. "But apparently, someone raised questions about our funding sources. They want documentation for every deposit we've had in the past 2 years." I almost smiled. Robert had warned me this might happen. When large monthly transfers suddenly stop, especially transfers from a charitable trust, banks notice. "Maybe Mom knows something," Darren said suddenly. "She's always been good with financial stuff." Lennox let out a short, bitter laugh. "Your mother, Darren, she barely knows how to use an ATM. What could she possibly know about business funding?" From the kitchen doorway, I saw my son's face fall. Even he was starting to notice how little she thought of me, of his family. "I just thought, maybe she might have some ideas," he said quietly. "The only idea your mother has is how to make everything about herself," Lennox shot back. "Remember last week when she tried to monopolize our business dinner? Thank God I sent her upstairs before she could embarrass us in front of important people." Important people. She meant the night she'd humiliated me. In her version, I was the problem. I was the embarrassment. Darren didn't argue, but I could see in his eyes he was beginning to wonder. I caught him casting a quick, almost guilty glance toward the kitchen. That night, I lay in bed listening to their argument seep through the thin walls, voices rising and hardening as their tension mounted. This doesn't make sense, Darren kept repeating, frustration sharpening his tone. Money doesn't just disappear. Someone has to know something. Well, it wasn't your precious mother, Lennox shot back, her voice like ice. She can barely balance a checkbook, let alone meddle in business investments. Could barely balance a checkbook. The same woman who'd been secretly financing their entire lifestyle for the past 2 years. Apparently too incompetent to understand money. I pulled Harold's pillow closer to my chest and let a small smile curve my lips in the dark. They thought I was helpless, invisible, irrelevant. They had no idea they'd been living on my generosity all along, while treating me like an obligation they were forced to endure. But soon they would know. Every comfort they'd taken for granted, every opportunity they'd assumed would always be there, every dollar they'd spent without a thought, it had all come from the very woman they dismissed as too clueless to understand serious business. The same woman they had told to eat her meals in her room, like a child being punished. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd give them something real to keep them awake at night. 2 weeks after I cut off their funding, I watched my daughter-in-law unravel. Lennox, once polished and poised, had turned into something sharp-edged and desperate. The mask she'd worn for 3 years was slipping, and what was underneath wasn't pretty. It started small, the impatient snap at a grocery store clerk when her credit card was declined, the way her voice took on a shrill edge when she spoke to clients over the phone, how she stared at me across the dinner table, as if she could peel away my skin and read whatever secrets she thought I was hiding. Your mother's been acting strange, she told Darren one evening while I prepared their coffee in the kitchen. The old house carried sound too well. I could hear every word. Haven't you noticed? She pressed. Darren sighed. Strange how? I don't know. Different. Like she's watching us. Mom's always been observant. Dad used to say she never missed anything. This is different, Darren. Yesterday I caught her going through the mail before I could get to it, and she's been asking weird questions about my business meetings. Of course, none of that was true. I hadn't touched their mail or asked about their meetings. But paranoia has a way of making people invent threats. The truth was simpler. I'd stopped shrinking away when she raised her voice. I no longer apologized for existing in my own home. And when someone has been invisible for years, even the smallest change feels seismic. Still, Lennox was right about one thing. I was different. For the first time since Harold died, I had a purpose beyond merely surviving. The real panic hit in their 3rd week without my money. Lennox had been scrambling to attract new investors, but legitimate business people, they ask uncomfortable questions. Where did your initial capital come from? Can you provide references from previous investors? Questions Lennox couldn't answer because she never knew Harold's trust fund had been her golden goose all along. I was washing dishes when I overheard her on the phone speaking with someone she clearly hoped would save her company. I understand you need documentation, she said, voice tight with forced politeness. But our previous investor preferred to remain anonymous. Everything was handled through intermediaries. A pause. No, I don't have contact information for them. It was all arranged through family connections. Another longer pause. What do you mean that sounds irregular? This is a legitimate business with real products and real customers. Her voice had lost all its sugar by the time she hung up. Hard, brittle, and furious. She slammed the phone down, then immediately started dialing again. That evening, I heard her corner Darren in their bedroom. I was in the hallway bathroom, but the walls didn't care about privacy. We need to ask your mother for a loan, Lennox said. A loan? Mom doesn't have that kind of money. How do you know? She's been in this house for 40 years. Your father worked in construction management. They must have savings. Lennox, Mom lives on Social Security and Dad's pension. She clips coupons, shops at thrift stores. Then we'll ask her to co-sign a business loan. Banks trust to older homeowners. My hands gripped the sink so tightly I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. 3 years of being treated like an unwanted guest. 3 years of being told my voice was irritating. 3 years of small humiliations and dismissals. And now they wanted to use my credit, my name, my home as collateral for the business that had been thriving on my money all along. I don't know, Darren said after a moment. Mom's been through a lot since Dad died. I don't want to stress her out with business problems. Stress her out? Lennox's voice rose, sharp and incredulous. Darren, this is our future. If Luminous Beauty fails, we lose everything. Maybe we could move out, get our own place. It might take some pressure off Mom and reduce expenses. Move out? Her voice pitched higher, nearly breaking. This house is perfect for entertaining clients. The address alone opens doors, and your mother loves having us here. We're doing her a favor by keeping her company. A favor. Living in my house, eating my food, cutting me out of my own dinner table conversations, all while patting themselves on the back for keeping me company. I returned quietly to my bedroom, but I could still hear her wearing him down, the way she always did. She owes us this much, Darren, after everything we've sacrificed to take care of her. Do you know how many social events I've turned down because I couldn't leave her alone? How many business dinners we've had to host here instead of going out, just so someone could keep an eye on her? Every lie was a little stab, but I had stopped bleeding for her words long ago. What struck me now was how easily Darren was starting to accept her version of events. In her story, they were my caretakers. They had given up their freedom to watch over a helpless old woman. By morning, she'd convinced him. He knocked on my door while I was getting dressed, something he hadn't done in months. He stood there looking like he had when he was 12 and had broken something valuable. "Mom, can we talk?" I opened the door, giving him the same calm smile I'd worn for years. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" "It's about Lennox's business." They were in trouble, again, and now, somehow, I had been cast as their potential savior. "We were wondering," Darren began, his voice carrying that hesitant mix of hope and shame. "We thought maybe you could help." "Help how?" I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "Well," he said, glancing toward Lennox as though to draw courage from her presence, "if you could co-sign for a small business loan, just temporary, until we get back on our feet." I looked into my son's eyes and, for a moment, the years dissolved. I saw not the weary, anxious man sitting in front of me now, but the little boy who used to run toward me with a fistful of dandelions, insisting they were the most beautiful flowers in the world. That same little boy was now asking me to risk my own home, my security, to save the business I had already been secretly bankrolling for 2 years. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice soft, as if the gentleness might make the request less impossible. "Maybe 50,000. 60 at the most," Darren said. Such a small sum if you compared it to what I'd already given them. But of course, they didn't know that. Their ignorance had become my armor, my leverage. "Let me think about it," I told them. "This is a big decision." Relief washed over Darren's face like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Really? You'll consider it?" "I'll consider it," I repeated. But what I was really considering was how far I was willing to let them fall before I decided whether or how to catch them. I told them I'd need a week to think about the loan. The truth was I needed time to collect information. Information I suspected might change everything. By Wednesday morning, my plan was in motion. While Darren was at work and Lennox was off at what she called a crucial client meeting, I drove to a small coffee shop downtown. I had arranged to meet someone there, someone who had been watching my family's situation with a growing sense of alarm. Margaret Chen, Robert's wife, had been Harold's secretary for 15 years before he retired. She had helped him set up the Montgomery Trust and, after his death, had kept in touch with me. Every so often she would call or stop by, checking to see how I was managing. "Ramona," she said warmly as she slid into the booth across from me, "you look better than you have in months." "I feel better," I admitted, though I wasn't sure that feeling would last. 2 days earlier, Margaret had called with information she believed I needed to hear. Information about Lennox that, she promised, would make sense of so much that had troubled me over the past 3 years. "Tell me what you found," I said, gripping my coffee cup like it was an anchor. Margaret took a cautious glance around before pulling out a folder. "I wasn't sure whether to share this," she said, "but after what you've told me about how they've been treating you." She opened the folder, revealing printed emails, bank statements, and what looked like court documents. "Lennox wasn't entirely honest about her background when she married Darren," Margaret said carefully. "This isn't her first marriage." My stomach turned. "What do you mean?" "She was married before," Margaret explained, "to a man named Richard Hartwell. Wealthy family owned several car dealerships in Connecticut. The marriage lasted only 2 years. She slid a yellowed newspaper clipping across the table. The headline, dated 4 years ago, read, "Local businessman granted restraining order against ex-wife." According to court records, Lennox had moved in with Richard's elderly mother right after the wedding. Within 6 months, she'd convinced him his mother was becoming senile and needed to be placed in a care facility. She took over the household finances and began isolating the older woman from her friends and relatives. I felt an icy draft sweep through me, despite the warm, sweet-smelling air of the coffee shop. What happened? Richard's mother tried to warn him, Margaret said, but Lennox was persuasive. She made the old woman's concerns sound like the ramblings of a confused mind. It wasn't until Richard discovered that $50,000 had been transferred from his mother's account to a business Lennox had started that he began to suspect something was wrong. Margaret turned the page in the folder to show me bank statements. She'd been draining his mother's savings bit by bit, Margaret continued, all while telling Richard the money was for his mother's care. When he confronted her, she claimed his mother had given her permission, said the woman was grateful for all Lennox had done and wanted to support her business. The parallels to my own life were almost too perfect, too terrifying. Did Richard believe her? I asked. At first, yes, but then his mother had a lucid moment right in front of witnesses and made it very clear she had never approved any of the transfers. Turns out, Lennox had been forging her signature on documents. I stared at the papers in front of me, seeing not just Richard's tragedy but my own future, laid out in black and white. What happened to his mother? I asked quietly. She died 6 months later, Margaret said softly. Heart attack, brought on, Richard believes, by the stress of it all. He blames himself for not listening sooner. Margaret's eyes met mine, steady and unflinching. He told me he'd give anything to warn other families about Lennox's pattern. Pattern? After the divorce, Richard started digging. Lennox has a history. She targets men with elderly mothers or sick relatives. She plays the part of the perfect caregiver, moves in, then slowly takes control while cutting the vulnerable person off from others. I thought of how quickly Lennox had moved into my house after marrying Darren, how she'd chipped away at my relationship with my son, convincing him I was a burden, that my voice didn't matter, that I was just a lonely old woman who needed managing. There's more, Margaret said quietly. I braced myself. Lennox is currently having an affair. The words hit me like a blow to the chest. With who? A man named Trevor Walsh. He's a business consultant she hired 6 months ago. They've been meeting at the Marriott downtown every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Margaret laid out hotel receipts, credit card statements, and chillingly, photos taken by a private investigator. She's paying him consulting fees 3 times the normal rate, and most of their meetings happen in hotel rooms, not offices. She's using her business funds, your money, essentially, to pay for it. I sat there staring at the evidence, feeling both an inferno of rage and a strange, cold relief. Rage at the betrayal, relief that at last I understood exactly who and what I was up against. Lennox wasn't just a difficult daughter-in-law. She was a predator, and my family was simply her latest project. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because Richard wanted you to know, Margaret said. He's watched this pattern destroy 3 families now. He can't stand by and let it happen again. He's willing to testify if you need him to. I gathered the papers, surprised at how steady my hands were. What does he think I should do? He thinks you should protect yourself and your son before it's too late. But he also thinks, Margaret paused. He thinks Lennox has made a mistake this time. She's used to dealing with confused elderly people and weak-willed men. She's not used to someone with the resources and intelligence to fight back. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling as though I'd just been handed a weapon I hadn't realized I needed. But information alone was one thing. Knowing what to do with it, that would be the real battle. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom with the folder of evidence still resting on my nightstand, its presence as heavy as the truth it carried. I picked up my phone and called Darren's cell. Mom, is everything okay? You never call my cell, he answered, sounding concerned. I need you to come home early tomorrow. There's something important we need to discuss. About the loan. Of course. Should Lennox be there too? My eyes drifted to the folder beside me. Actually, I'd rather talk to you alone first, just to make sure I have all the details straight in my head. Sure, Mom, whatever you need. What I needed, more than anything, was for my son to finally see the truth about the woman he had married. And tomorrow, I was going to make sure he could no longer ignore it. Darren arrived early Thursday afternoon, walking into the kitchen to find me pulling a tray of his favorite cookies out of the oven. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to race home from school to tell me all about his day. Something smells amazing, he said with a smile, settling into his usual chair at the kitchen table. You didn't have to go to all this trouble just for our talk. It's no trouble at all. Sometimes serious conversations go down a little easier with comfort food. I poured him a glass of milk and set a plate of warm cookies between us, just like I had when he was young, and we needed to talk about difficult things. Mom, about the loan, he began, but I held up my hand. Before we talk about any loan, there are things you need to know about Lennox, about your marriage, about what's been going on in this house. I opened the folder Margaret had given me and placed the first document in front of him. Darren's face went pale as he read the headline, Richard Hartwell's restraining order. Mom, where did you get this? From someone who cares about our family, someone who has seen what Lennox has done to other families and couldn't stay silent any longer. I laid it all out for him. The first marriage, the repeated pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly relatives, the systematic isolation, the calculated financial exploitation. Piece by piece, the evidence piled up, and I watched his expression shift, confusion giving way to disbelief, then to something close to horror. This can't be right, he whispered, staring down at the hotel receipts. Lennox wouldn't. She loves me. Does she, sweetheart? When was the last time she defended you to anyone? When was the last time she put your needs ahead of her own convenience? Darren ran a hand through his hair, just like he used to do when struggling with homework, his mind clearly spinning. But the business meetings, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at the Marriott, aren't business meetings, I told him evenly. They're affairs, Darren. Lennox has been using company money drawn from your father's trust fund, to pay for hotel rooms where she meets her lover. His head snapped up. Trust fund? What trust fund? I took a deep breath. It was time for the final truth. Your father set up the Montgomery Trust before he died. It's been quietly funding Lennox's business for the past 2 years. Every dollar she believed came from anonymous investors actually came from your father's legacy, and I control it now. Darren stared at me like I just confessed to being a secret agent. You've been funding Luminous Beauty? Unknowingly at first, yes. Your father wanted to help you both succeed, but also wanted you to feel independent. He never imagined that the people benefiting from his generosity would treat his widow like an unwanted burden. I showed him the bank statements, the trust documents, proof that every comfort they'd enjoyed was built on Harold's money. Money that stopped flowing the day after Lennox told me to eat in my room. The funding crisis you've been panicking about, I said, it happened because I pulled my support. I got tired of financing people who couldn't even show me basic respect in my own home. His hands shook as he set the papers down. Mom, I had no idea. I swear I never knew any of this. I know you didn't, but you did know how Lennox treated me, and you chose to accept it. Again and again, you chose her comfort over my dignity. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made him glance toward the window, panic flickering in his eyes. What do I do? How do I face her knowing all this? You don't have to do anything right now, I said calmly. Just watch. Listen. Pay attention to how she acts when she thinks she's in control. Lennox's voice rang out the moment the front door opened. Darren, are you home? I have amazing news. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, practically glowing. Trevor found us new investors. Well, one major investor who wants to fund the entire expansion. We're meeting him tomorrow to sign the contracts. I watched my son's face as he processed that. Trevor, the same man she'd been having an affair with, was now supposedly finding investors for the business. That's great, Darren said carefully. Who is this investor? Someone Trevor's worked with before. Very private, very exclusive. Wants to remain anonymous. But he's willing to put in $200,000. $200,000, more than the trust had provided in 2 whole years. I couldn't help wondering where the money was really coming from and what Lennox might be offering in return. We'll finally be able to expand properly, she went on, before her eyes fell on me. The glow faded, replaced by a sharp edge. Ramona, did you decide about co-signing that loan? Because if this other investor comes through, we might not even need it. Actually, I said evenly. I have made a decision. I won't be co-signing anything. Her smile faltered. Why not? Because I don't think your business model is sustainable. Her tone snapped like a whip. What would you know about business models? You've never worked a day in the corporate world. You don't understand the first thing about building a company. Darren cleared his throat. Actually, Lennox, Mom has been more involved in your business than you realize. Something in his voice made her go still. What do you mean? Tell her, Mom, Darren said quietly. Tell her where the money really came from. I rose slowly from my chair, savoring the way her confidence began to crack. The Montgomery Trust has been funding Luminous Beauty from the very beginning, I said. Every so-called anonymous investor, every mysterious transfer, Every single dollar you thought came from strangers, all of it came from my husband's estate. Money I control. Her face drained of color. That's impossible. When the flow of money dried up, you never stopped to wonder why the so-called serious investors suddenly disappeared. You never thought to ask why no one could ever give you the contact information of the people who supposedly backed you before. I opened another folder, thicker this time. Inside were copies of every single transfer, every payment, every last dollar that had moved from the trust into your business. 2 years, Lennox. 2 years of building your dream on my money, all while treating me like I was nothing. 2 years while you carried on with Trevor, using my funds to cover your hotel stays. Lennox's lips parted and closed again, soundless, like a fish gasping on the dock. Finally, she turned to Darren. You can't possibly believe this nonsense. She's just a bitter old woman, jealous of our success. But Darren was already on his feet, hotel receipts in hand. Is this nonsense too, Marriott stays? Consulting fees billed to the business account? On the exact Tuesdays and Thursdays, you were mysteriously out. It was as if the fight drained from her all at once. She leaned against the doorway, shoulders heavy, and for the first time since I'd known her, she actually looked her age. I want you out, Darren said, his voice steady but quiet. Pack your things. Leave tonight. She tried to argue, to explain, to charm him one last time. But the proof was ironclad, and Darren could finally see the act for what it was. That evening, she left with 2 suitcases in her car. No tantrums, no threats, no melodrama, just the silent collapse of someone whose game was finally up. When she was gone, Darren and I sat in the kitchen again. The house felt larger, lighter, like it could breathe again without her. Mom, he said softly, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. You don't owe me an apology, sweetheart, I told him. You were manipulated by someone who's very, very good at it. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. I reached across the table, wrapping my hand around his. You were protecting your marriage. That's what a good husband does. You just didn't know your wife didn't deserve that kind of protection. 3 months later, Darren moved back into his childhood bedroom while the divorce made its slow crawl through the courts. It wasn't the life either of us had pictured, but at least it was honest. More honest than anything we'd lived in years. I still had the Montgomery trust, but I used it differently now, with a clearer head. Harold's money went to causes that carried his spirit forward. Scholarships for young people, aid for elderly victims of financial abuse, and ensuring my son's future was safe and secure. As for Lennox, she vanished from our world. Through Margaret, I later heard she'd moved to Florida, already working her way into another family's life. I thought about warning them, but I'd learned that some truths are only believed when they're discovered firsthand. On quiet evenings, Darren and I would cook together, just like we had when he was young, eating at the dining room table, talking about our days. My voice no longer grated on his nerves. My presence no longer felt like something he had to work around. I'd found my strength again. My voice. The empire Harold built was still in my hands, but I ruled it wisely now, no longer as a figurehead, but as a woman who had reclaimed her place. And at my table, in my own home, sat my son, finally able to see me for who I truly was.